I am so incredibly excited to be here. As Cindy said, my name is Melissa Blotter. I'm the founder of Directed Success. And over the last 20 years, yes, shocking as that may be, I have been in a variety of leadership roles. As Cindy mentioned, I've been a teacher. I've been a director, district leadership, and then ultimately moved into training and development. And throughout all of those experiences, something that I've learned really interesting about leadership is that most people think leadership is built in the big moments, that difficult decision, that major impact, the crisis that happens. But I've learned something different over that time, and that's that great leaders aren't created in those big moments, they're revealed in the smaller moments. Leadership is actually built way before those big situations even happen. And so today we're going to talk all about those everyday interactions that either strengthen trust or weaken it in your leadership skills. It's simple things like the way we greet people, the way we listen, the way we give feedback, and ultimately the way we respond when someone makes a mistake. That's what today is all about. It's not doing more. It's not adding something else to your plate. It's not finding more hours in the day. Instead, I want us to focus on how we sharpen our leadership the moments you're already doing every single day. And Mariah took my a little icebreaker activity. I'm so excited. I was going to have you type in the chat box. Let me know where you're from, your role. And one word, though, I want you to type in one word that describes your leadership on June 17th. What is one word that describes your leadership? Type in the chat box for me as you think about your leadership. What is one word that pops in your mind? And as those responses come in, I can definitely see why this conversation is so important because what you think about leadership really impacts your team culture. It might be you think leadership is compensation, it could be benefits, maybe it's your policies, you're a juggler, you're patient. All of those things matter. And leadership impacts every single part of your team culture. It shapes how you communicate. It shapes your expectation. It shapes the experiences of all the people in your building, your big people and your little people. And today we're going to look at leadership in five areas. We're going to talk about the moments that matter. We're going to talk about the leadership across the life cycle and the employee and family experience. Then we're going to sharpen our leadership lens through some real world scenarios. And finally, I'm going to have you leave with a practical leadership challenge that you can immediately apply in your role the moment you hang up from me today. But I also want to make sure that as we move through the call today, we're not thinking about theory. I want you to think about the real people in your building, the teacher who needs that encouragement, the assistant director who needs clarity. It might be the family who needs a little bit of confidence, the team member who needs coaching. That, that, my friends, that's where leadership lives. And that's where I want you to focus today throughout the call. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when people think about leadership, they typically think about the big moments, the performance reviews, the staff meetings, those difficult conversations, those crisis or emergencies. But leadership, as I mentioned, isn't built in those moments. Leadership is built before those moments even happen because trust is built through patterns, not events. And so think about the leaders you've worked with. You didn't decide that they were trustworthy because of one interaction. You decided they consistently showed up in ways that earned your trust. And the same is true for our teams. Every interaction that you have is sending a message. It's sending the message that I notice you, I value you, I support you. Or sometimes unintentionally, it's sending the message that I don't have time, you're on your own, or you only hear from me when something is wrong. Leadership is happening whether we're being intentional with it or not. And so the question that I want you to think about today is, what are our everyday interactions teaching people about our leadership? So I have an opportunity for you to type in the chat box. If you didn't notice, this is going to be a very engaging call. So warm up your typing fingers. I want you to think about the best leader you've ever worked for. Not the smartest, not the most successful, not the one with the biggest, all of the titles in the world, the one you would willingly follow again. I want you to type, you don't have to put that person's name in the chat box, but I want you to type one quality they consistently demonstrated. What was that one quality of that leader that you would follow again? What was the quality that they exhibited? Support, kind. Yes, all of those words. Great leadership, passionate, thoughtful, encouraging, understanding, all of those. But you notice what's not showing up in that list, I hope. You notice it's not things like great at spreadsheets or excellent budget management or even knew every policy, knew the handbook in and out. Those things matter, don't get me wrong. But people remember how leaders made them feel. They remember whether they felt respected, supported, or seen. Those leadership habits, those are the ones we practice every day, and they ultimately create the leadership reputation that people remember. And leadership isn't a title. So get rid of the understanding that leadership is a title. It's not about a position, it's not about authority. Leadership is behavior because behavior is repeated consistently and that becomes influence. Leadership is influence. The strongest leaders that I know I've ever worked for weren't necessarily the loudest in the room, they were the most consistent. The teams knew what to expect. The feedback was clear and intentional. Their follow through was reliable. And ultimately, their presence alone created a sense of stability for myself, for the team, because leadership isn't something that we only turn on during important moments. It should be something that we practice every single day through consistent behaviors. So I want to introduce you to one of the most powerful leadership concepts that I've ever encountered. If you've taken trainings with me in the past, this is one that I constantly fall back on. And that is the 5-to-1 Gottman ratio. And Dr. John Gottman studied what made relationships successful for decades. And what he discovered was incredibly fascinating. And that was that thriving relationships consistently had 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative or corrective interaction. And so when you see negative, I want you to remember that that's not necessarily a big blow up moment. That is a feedback. That's a coaching moment. That is an opportunity that we are taking as a learning opportunity, not necessarily just a negative interaction. And later researchers, that 5-to-1 principle, 5 positive to 1 negative, they found a very similar pattern in high performing teams. And I do want to stress positivity does not mean avoiding accountability. A positive interaction doesn't mean lowering our expectations, and it doesn't mean pretending that everything is fine. Great leaders still have those challenging conversations. They still address concerns. They still coach based on performance, but they make sure that they have enough positive deposit that people feel safe to receive that feedback. And so think about it this way. If the only time your team ever hears from you is when something goes wrong, what will they begin to associate with your presence? It's going to be correction. It's going to be stress. They're going to associate anxiety with your presence. But if they regularly experience things like encouragement, recognition, support, appreciation, curiosity. Ultimately, feedback in that moment lands differently because trust already exists. And friends, that is leadership. And when people feel safe to receive that feedback, it lands so much differently. So let's kind of take a moment and pause and define what we think of as a positive interaction. As I mentioned, positive is not ignoring problems, and it doesn't mean being fake, and it doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be something as simple as, I noticed that. Thank you. Gratitude is one of the most underutilized positive interactions. Even things like, I'm glad you're here. I know today was hard. Acknowledging, recognizing, appreciating. But then also, silence or neutral interactions, they don't count as positive ones. You have to intentionally deposit for it to count as a positive interaction. And so the other thing I want to make sure is you might be saying, well, I deposit way more than 5 to 1. 5 to 1 is the minimum to maintain that stable relationship, that healthy relationship. If you want thriving cultures and not just stable ones, we really need to use those everyday moments to build connection and build trust consistently. Because ultimately, here's what I've learned in my non 20 years in the space, people don't leave in one moment. They decide over time. They decide through your patterns, they decide through your interactions, through that accumulated experience. That's when they decide to leave, not just that one moment that they say. It's a series of patterns. So now, before we move on, I want to encourage you to type in the chat box. Give me a yes in the chat box if you've ever felt like you've spent your entire day correcting problems. Have you ever felt like you've spent your entire day correcting problems? Type yes in the chat box. Those are coming in fast and furious. So now what I want you to do is pause and type yes in the chat box if you can remember the last compliment you received. A few coming in. Okay. Good. So that means some people are depositing into you, which is so incredibly important. But if you can't remember the last time that someone gave you a compliment, I want you to put that little nugget in the back of your brain and just remember that just like you have to deposit into others, we should be looking for our buckets to be filled too. So find your person, talk to your people, and get those buckets filled because you're filling others. Make sure others are pouring into you as well. All right. So now, why we are all here today is talking about leadership through the life cycle. So I want to zoom out and talk about the family and staff experience because leadership isn't something that only happens during those performance reviews. Leadership happens throughout the entire life cycle experience, whether we're talking about families or we're talking about staff. There are leadership moments built in there at each point in that life cycle. And we have the entry, which is that first initial impression that they get. We have early engagement. We have the relationship building stage. We have milestones and growth, and we have exit and transition. And we are going to dig into each of these stages one by one, but at each stage, you have to remember that people are asking themselves, can I trust this person? Do I belong here? Do I feel supported? Can I grow here? And so as we go through each of these stages, I want you to think, how do you answer each of those questions? Can I trust this person? Do I belong here? Do I feel supported? And can I grow here? Oop, there we go. So for the first point, this is going to be our entry point. For families, this is the inquiry. This is the tour. This is them deciding that they want to enroll with you. And for staff, it's the interview, it's the hiring decision, and it's the start date. And leadership begins before that trust even exists. It's that first email and how you respond. It's the first phone call and how you respond. The first interview, the first tour and what your school looks like and feels like. People are forming impressions of you and your leadership skills before you even realize it, because leadership ultimately starts way earlier than most of us think. So the next stage, that is going to be the early engagement stage. This stage for me is incredibly, incredibly important because now people are starting to ask themselves, was what I promised during that entry stage, is that actually true? For families, this is their first day. This is their introduction to teachers and the introduction to the classroom and to your school. For staff, this is your onboarding week. This is introducing them to the team, having the team welcome. This is that first day. This is also, friends, that first mistake. These moments tell people whether growth with you as a leader is safe. So I want you to self reflect here. And I mentioned those questions at the very beginning. Think of your staff. Is that first week for them, is it filled with clarity or is it filled with chaos? Do they feel welcome or do they feel like they're being thrown in right out of the gate? So really start self-reflecting at each of these stages, your current leadership, and how we can use each of these stages to continue building those moments that matter. The third stage, this is the relationship building stage. For families, it's just the daily communication. It's what is being communicated to them. Is there clarity for them? Is there open communication and honesty? These are also those class transitions during drop off and pickup. What does that look like for the family? For staff, this is our daily check in. Are you actually acknowledging your staff on a daily basis? It's also the observations and feedback time. This is where your leadership becomes consistency. For me, this is where you can make most of those positive deposits because ultimately trust is built through repetition. It's not built through charisma, who's the loudest person in the room, who has the biggest personality. Trust is built through repetition, doing what you said you'd do, following through, being available, and ultimately showing up for your families and your staff. This stage, this to me is one that I feel we have such, as an industry, such an opportunity to excel in when we are really focused on it. For milestones and growth, people don't just want appreciation, they want development. And for families, that's things like family conferences. We're having celebrations for them. Maybe that's a graduation ceremony up to the next class that they're going into. Just really spending the time with them, celebrating those milestones and growth. And then for your staff, this is where professional development is so incredibly important. And not just you have to take this course, but what course interests you or what training interests you, letting them know the options that exist. because one of the most important leadership questions we can ask is, how am I helping this person grow? It's also making sure that your staff know that there is a promotion path. It might not be, they might want to be a teacher forever and always, and that is fantastic. But there are still so many opportunities for them to continue building those skills as an educator. And are we supporting them in that vision? Are we supporting their growth? And are we celebrating them for those milestones? So now I know it's shocking, but not every staff member and not every family is going to be with you forever. For most of us, we have an age cutoff for children. For a lot of us, we also have staff that want to go into different professions or they get promoted into different roles. But leadership doesn't end when a relationship ends. The way you handle transitions says just as much about our leadership as the way you handled those beginnings. And so for families, this is graduation, this is the withdrawal process. The staff, this is an exit interview, a farewell, and a transition. Are we leaving things on a high note so that when staff or families talk about us and their experience, they're talking about it as a referral and not a warning? So now this is where the interaction happens, friends. Let's sharpen our leadership lens. I'm going to go through several common leadership interactions, and I want you to use the chat box for me. I want you to type a P for a positive or a deposit, or is it an N for a negative or a withdrawal? I don't want you to overthink it, but as you see that leadership interaction on the screen, I want you to type P for positive or N for negative. Is it one of the five or is it the one? Oh, well, those aren't we're all supposed to come in at the beginning. I apologize for that. My animation, I went a little click happy there. Let's go with scenario one, the first line that is on there, saying, I noticed how patiently you handled that parent conversation. Is that a positive or is that a negative? Yes, that is a deposit. That is a positive. I noticed how patiently you handled that parent conversation. Simply noticing, recognizing, and encouraging that staff member. The second one, saying, we've already talked about this. Is that a positive or a negative? A deposit or a withdrawal? Yeah, we've already talked about this. Remember, it's not about just having the conversation or mentioning it, it's about how we have that conversation. And you might have already talked about it, but it's how you handle that challenging conversation or that difficult conversation. All right, so now let's go to that third one that came out way too soon, and that is observing a classroom and never following up. Is that a positive for a P, a deposit, or a negative withdrawal? Yeah. So this is one of those ones that kind of falls in that neutral category, but remember, neutral is still not a positive one. We did the observation, but we never gave them feedback. We never let them know the wins or the areas of opportunity within that observation moment. And so I think we sometimes get wrapped up in, I did the observation, I spent time in the classroom. But if we never give them feedback, we never coach them or challenge them, we're dropping the ball from that growth perspective. And that is really an opportunity for us across the board to continue that deposit. All right, so scenario four, covering a classroom so someone can take a break. Is that a positive or a negative? Yeah, that is going to be a positive. Covering, and it's even better if you were proactively covering a classroom so that they can take a break. If there is that predictability in their schedule, they know at 10 o'clock, that's when our breaks start happening. Or they just call and say, hey, Miss Melissa, I need a break. Can I have a 10-minute? I need a breather. That is positive. We are depositing through our actions. And then the final one, talking about concerns in front of other parents. Is that a negative or a positive? Negative. Yeah. Yeah. Y'all are experts at this point. Fantastic. That is a negative one. And it is challenging for a lot of us because we don't have quiet spaces to go. If your office is the desk in the front of the lobby and you don't have a quiet space, it just means that you need to be more intentional with when you have those conversations, planning around it. Hey, I need to use the staff lounge or I need to step into a classroom when you have to have those challenging conversations with families. If you don't have a space that is an office or somewhere that you can step in, being more intentional with when you're planning those conversations, because we don't need everybody communicating those negative things right in front of everyone else. Great job. Love it. So now you might be saying, Melissa, this is all great. This is all fantastic, but I've got 8,000 different things going on throughout the day. And it's, again, here's what I've learned that there are things that are going to get in the way. And most leaders don't struggle because they don't care. Most leaders struggle because they're overwhelmed. They've got things, there's no time in the day. They're stressed. They're disconnected from the vision or the mission of their organization. They've got competing priorities, but you told me this was a priority and this is a priority. And then there's also something called leadership drift, and that's when our intentions stop matching our actions. We still care as leaders, we still value people, but we become so busy in our day to day that we stop demonstrating it consistently. That's the leadership drift. It's when our intentions stop matching our action. And the one thing I want to point out is that the goal here is not perfection. The goal is simply to become more aware of how you are interacting on those during those day-to-day moments so that you can become more self-aware and say, you know what? I might be stressed here. I might not have time for this, but I'm going to make it up in this other time and really trying to look and reflect on how do I ensure that I'm hitting those 5 deposits before I lean into those coaching or negative opportunities. So if you remember nothing else from me today, I want you to remember this slide so that when you start to get into that leadership drift, we can come back to these 5 habits. These 5 habits don't cost anything. They don't take up a whole bunch of your time. They are simple, easy leadership habits that you can do every single day. Use names. Pretty simple. Know the people that are in your building and not just know them by face, know them by name. The biggest one to building psychological safety is follow through. If you say you're going to do something, follow through on it. And if you're not able to follow through on it at the time that you told them that you would, let them know. Hey, I've been pulled into something else right now. I really want to follow up on that. Can we pick that up tomorrow? Or can we pick that up Tuesday of next week? Make sure that there is still some communication, that they don't just think you dropped the ball or that you're ignoring the follow through that you promised. And then notice effort. When people are trying and really wanting to grow or wanting to show that they are invested in you, notice that effort and show them that you are invested in them. And then one that I love is be a little more curious. Ask one more question just to get either more clarity or continue the conversation. And just like we encourage it with our kiddos, let's have the same expectation with big kiddos as well. Ask an open ended question, not just a yes or no or a closed question. Ask that family member, ask that staff member an open ended question to start having that conversation. And then celebrate progress. Any little bit of progress, celebrate it, yell it from the rooftops, whatever it might be. Celebrate those little wins. And these are leadership behaviors, not extras. None require additional staff members. None require budget approval. None require a strategic plan. Yet all five will strengthen your leadership. These habits create clarity, they create consistency, trust, connection, and that my friends, that's what leadership is built on. Clarity, consistency, trust, and connection. Of this list, there's five on the screen. Type in the chat box. What of these five comes naturally to you? Are you more of someone that can use names? Are you someone that follows through? Do you notice effort? Do you ask one more question or do you celebrate progress? Type in the chat box. Which one comes more naturally to you? Yeah. Using names and even thinking about that as it related to that life cycle with the entry point, even when new staff members come in to interview or new family members come in for a tour, knowing their names right then, that goes so far. All right, now I want to flip it. Of these five, knowing you, which one needs the most sharpening? Which one is your biggest area of opportunity? Yeah, Melissa, you hit the nail on the head. It's the follow through for a lot of us. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Love it. Well, now that we've done that leadership, we've done the self reflection, we're a little more self aware. I want to leave you with a leadership challenge. I don't want you to focus on changing anyone else. I want you to focus on observing yourself. Track your interactions with your staff and family. Focus on observing yourself. Notice your leadership moments and ask yourself, where was I clear? Where was I consistent? Where did I build trust? And where did I miss an opportunity? At the end of the day, track your interactions and did you offer five positive interactions for every one negative or coaching? Who did you intentionally connect with? Outside of, your teachers coming and going, who did you intentionally go to and connect with? And then where did you miss a moment to connect with someone? Were you so focused on your budget spreadsheet that you missed the families coming in? That's where you missed a moment. The goal here is not to judge yourself. That is not what this is intended to do. This is intended to simply be an opportunity for you to become more self-aware of you and your leadership skills. And I want you to ask yourself at the end of the day these three questions, but also, did you sharpen your leadership skills today or did you dull them? Because ultimately, that simple question can transform how aware you are of your leadership. So I'm done. I went way faster than I planned, but before we wrap up and before everyone leaves, obviously we'll open it up for questions if you have questions. But I really want to leave you with one final thought. And that is that leadership growth rarely happens because we learn something new. I'm not here telling you anything new. But when leadership happens is when we become more intentional about what we're already doing. It's the conversation we're already having, the feedback we're already giving, the moments we're already leading. Leadership isn't about doing more. It's about sharpening how you show up in what you're already doing. Because the next leadership moment probably isn't a staff meeting, it isn't an evaluation, it isn't a crisis. It's probably the next conversation you're going to have when you leave this webinar. And in that moment, you'll either have an opportunity to encourage, coach, clarify, support, recognize, or connect all the things we've talked about. And those moments may seem small, but friends, that's where leadership is built. It's built one moment at a time.